Bonsoir. Je peux le faire en français en fait. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Gaëtan Bruel, director of Villa Albertine and cultural counselor of France in the US, and I'm very happy to see so many of you here this evening to celebrate Leïla Slimani and the launch of the American edition of her novel, Watch Us Dance, translated by Sam Taylor. Watch Us Dance is the second novel in Leïla Slimani's trilogy about a family's experiences in Morocco. While the first novel in the trilogy focused on Morocco's journey to independence, this second powerful text explores a family's socio-economic rise in a newly independent country divided by race and class lines. Ultimately, Watch Us Dance is a gripping portrayal of a journey of an interracial family and a nation through the promises and peril of change. Leïla Slimani has just arrived in New York for a one-month residency with Villa Albertine, with the ambition to continue polishing the next volume of her trilogy, but also to work on a more personal research project. She is part of the 170 writers and artists Villa Albertine has already welcomed across the US in more than 50 cities since its launch in fall 2021. Leïla Slimani's previous novel, The Perfect Nanny, earned her the honor of becoming the first French-American woman to win France's most prestigious literary prize, the Goncourt, and the work was recognized as one of the New York Times Book Review's 10 best books of 2018. And it is no surprise that she has been selected by President Macron as a personal representative for La Francophonie and currently chairs the jury for the 2023 International Booker Prize. Slimani's prose and politics have also rightfully earned her a place among Vanity France's annual list of the 50 most influential French people in the world. Joining us tonight is the talented translator Sam Taylor, known not only for his acclaimed novels, but also for his skill in translating Slimani's works. Sam has brought to life over 60 books from French to English. His translations, including Proust, The 75 Folios, or Maëlys de Kerangal's The Heart, have garnered critical recognition and prestigious awards, such as the French-American Translation Prize and the Lewis Galantier Prize. And finally, we are honored to have Parul Sehgal with us. You are a staff writer at The New Yorker. Previously, you were a book critic at The Times, where you also worked as a senior editor and a columnist. Parul has won an award for her criticism from the New York Press Club, the National Book Critics Circle, and the Robert B. Silvers Foundation. You teach in the Graduate Creative Writing Program at NYU. Finally, I really want to extend my warmest gratitude to all those who have made this evening possible, notably to John Siciliano, Leïla American editor, to the wonderful team of Penguin Random House, and to both the Albertine book team and the Books and Ideas department at Villa Albertine. Really, your dedication and passion have brought us together tonight, so I want to thank you. And without further ado, I leave the floor to the three of you for what promises to be a fascinating discussion. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Can you hear me? Oh, I can hear myself. Okay. Hi, thank you all for being here. I'm so honored to be here with this pair of distinguished writer and translator and novelist. And I think specifically for this book, which is a work of imagination and excavation, and I think it's marked by everything that Leïla wants to do with language, which was to go to a place of difficulty. You have this preternatural comfort with difficulty, attraction to difficulty, and I think you like to keep things very difficult for yourself. And I think we're going to talk about how this book, to those of us who have read it, feels just exciting. We see a writer constantly on the verge and the cusp of change and transformation, and a lot of risk that both of you have taken, I think, with this particular book. And as I was thinking about how to begin, I started to think about how the work of writer and translator are very similar in a few ways, but specifically in this. So as we know, those of us who've read the book, this book is animated by personal history. right? But as you sat down and you were thinking about this trilogy, this is, you know, the second book in a trilogy, as you were sitting down to write this, and as I was sitting down to read it, I was like, you had to have freed the material from your own history. You cannot imagine the way that Leïla does in this book, the scenes of violence and sex and danger, with thinking that this is my grandmother, or you shouldn't, you know? So it's you have to feel free. And similarly, when a translator sits down and is going to bring something into a different language, you kind of can't sit there thinking that the writer is there fighting you on every verb. You have to, not own is to maybe too aggressive, but it has to become yours. So I think that's where I'd like us to begin, what it means to make a story, and particularly this story, yours, in both your ways. Maybe Leïla, we can start with you.
Thank you, Parul. You know, this story and the story of The Country of Others is inspired by my family, and the characters of Aisha and Mehdi are inspired by my parents. But to be really honest, I think that I don't know my parents. There are a lot of things about them that I don't know, and probably a lot of things that I don't want to know or that I don't want to ask. That's not the meaning of the book. I'm not trying to discover something. I'm not trying to reveal any secret or any kind of truth about them. I'm trying to invent them, to invent my parents, the way I invented them when I was a child. You know, when I write, I try to remember the way I looked at them when I was 8 or 9. For me, they were my parents, but they were also characters in a story I was telling myself. My grandmother, she was a character. She was this woman who came from Alsace and who experienced the war. My grandfather was a soldier, and he used to tell me very wonderful stories about the war. And for me, it was just that. He was this character. My father was a very mysterious man. He would never speak about himself, about his past. I never met my grandparents. I never met his sisters and brothers. And when I would ask him about his past, he would give me a book and say, the answer is in this book. I remember I was maybe 10, and he gave me Martin Eden by Jack London, and he said, it's my story. And when I asked him about Morocco, and I said, I don't understand about inequality, why are there so many poor people in the street and we have money? He gave me a book by Dostoevsky, Humiliated and Offended, and he said, with this book you will understand. So my only dialogue with my father was through books and through fiction. But of course, I think it had a big influence on me and on this idea that for me it's absolutely impossible to build a real frontier between fiction and reality. Everything is fiction. Myself, I live myself as a fiction. I am a character in my head, and I'm trying to build a character. I'm not sure I'm real. I think I'm not trying to reveal any truth. I'm trying just to tell you the fiction I have in my head.
Okay, well, I think what you said about freedom for translation is absolutely true. I think if I didn't feel the trust of the writer, it would be much more difficult to translate it in a way that flowed properly and worked in English. With Leïla's novels, with her prose generally, it isn't difficult. There isn't a level of difficulty there, because it just translates, it moves into English without any need for massive change. There are other writers that's not true about, but her sentences are very carefully constructed in the first place. So it's almost just like following tracks all the way through it. It's not something that it's one of the easier novelists to translate out of the ones I've done.
I'm not sure it's a compliment. I'm wondering if it's a good thing or not.
Let's take it. I'm so struck by what you said, and there's like a ripple through when you said, "I'm not sure I'm real." And I remember you talking in interviews about the storytellers in your family as a child were the women, and storytelling was almost part of women's work. it was a way of sustaining. And anybody who knows Leïla knows that she's a great novelist, but she's also an amazing storyteller about anything that happens. She just can, the way that she just will tell you any scene is fantastic. And I found this story that you once told about you as a little girl. And when you were 4, you told your parents, "It's my mouth and I'll say what I want," earning you the family nickname "C'est ma bouche." And I just, as I was thinking, about this particular book with its scope, with its particular relationship to silence and secrets and the current climate for fiction, and I just started to think so much about that. So much of what our job as writers and readers is to keep asserting "C'est ma bouche," And can you tell me a little bit about what that means for you at this moment?
But yeah, I think also that you have to find a sort of equilibrium between c'est ma bouche, so being free and saying whatever you want to say, but also I think that in literature there is a sort of erotic of silence. Literature is also about what you're not saying, about ellipse, about secrets, and I love working with this, with silence. I love the fact that some parts of my characters will stay very mysterious, very dark. I don't want to give any kind of explanation. But when I was a child, I said to my parents, "It's c'est ma bouche," and for a very long time they called me like this. But I know that my parents, at the same time, they were very proud of me for saying that, but they were also very afraid of the fact that I was maybe going to open my mouth and that I was going to have problems as a woman, and as a woman who was defending freedom of speech, freedom in terms of sexuality and abortion and all that, and who will denounce any kind of situation that I felt was unfair. So my parents, they had to explain to me that I was living in two worlds: the world of the house, where there was certain rules and I was free and I could do a certain kind of things and we would believe in certain values, and each time I would go out of the house it was different laws, different values. And it was very difficult because at the same time I felt my parents were teaching me to be a liar and to be a hypocrite, and that they didn't assume what they believed in. And I think this book is also about that, about the lack of radicalism. People like my parents, bourgeois from those kind of country, who lived in a very nuanced and complex system of value where you believe certain things but you can't really say that you believe in that. And I think that we are all jealous of people who are real radicals and who would really die for their ideas and who they will really die for fighting for inequalities. It was not the case of my family, and I felt that maybe my parents were coward, and I'm a coward also, because sometimes I would rather not say the things that I think. But for writing, it's very interesting to write about that, to write about a certain kind of corruption, the fact that at 4 you are c'est ma bouche, and at 40 you are not c'est ma bouche anymore. But it's I think it's something that a lot of us experience. It's the human condition. You become an adult and you understand that sometimes, what's the point of being c'est ma bouche and fighting for this? Don't care. But yeah, I try sometimes to remember about this girl, but I'm not this girl anymore, if I want to be really honest.
Can I ask you that question too, Sam, as a novelist and as a translator, what it means to think about the relationship between fiction and silence? And is that something you feel like you're also moving into?
Not with translation, really. I mean, with translation, everything's in the text anyway, so the silences are part of it. I mean, it's like, what was the 433, the whole symphony of silence? With writing, absolutely, yeah. The unsaid is a big part of it, I think.
And I think also, but but as the translator, to sort of respect and perceive the silences of the text is something that I can imagine is one of the more delicate parts of the job. I mean, it blew my mind, given the amount of books that both of you have worked on together, that this is the first time you're meeting. And I would love to hear a little bit about how you both understand this relationship.
So Sam, yeah, that's the first time we meet in person, but we have a dialogue. We write emails, and he asks me questions, and I try to answer the best I can. But it's very weird because it's at the same time there's a sort of intimacy because he knows. I feel he knows me, and he knows a lot of things about me because of my books. I'm sure that he knows a lot about my obsessions and things, the repetitions in my books, and probably about my flaws as a writer. And I hope you won't tell anyone. Just keep it between us. But I remember. I don't know if you remember, Sam. It's an anecdote. First, he translated my book Lullaby, I think, The Perfect Nanny, and then he translated Adele. And Adele is a book about a woman who is a sex addict, and there are a lot of sex scenes in the book. And I remember that one day, I don't know if he called me or he emailed me, and he said, you know, I'm translating the sex scenes, and it's not very easy because in English we can't use the word sex for the genitals. So in French we can say le sexe de l'homme, le sexe de la femme. So we need to find more precise word. So I was like, yeah, okay. So, and he said, so in this scene, do you want vagina or vulva? And I was like, yeah, I think that now there's a certain closeness between us. And I don't know if you remember, but like for 2 days we were speaking about vulva and vaginas, and yeah, it built something between you and me.
Yeah, that novel was interesting because you're right. Every word in English for those parts has some kind of tone to it. You know, there's nothing neutral about any of them. So it definitely changed the way that book sounded, or the way the book read when you put it into English.
No, that's very interesting, the question of vocabulary for scenes, for sex. I think it's probably the hardest thing to write are sex scenes. Not because it's difficult to describe the scene, but because the language that we have is always already very heavy, you know, although it's very pornographic or too much erotic, it's very difficult to write it in a very clinical way with a certain distance. So it was very interesting for me also to hear my translators in English or in German and in Spanish, and to see through language the different visions a society can have of sexuality. It was very interesting.
I mean, with this trilogy, I mean, you mentioned Lullaby, Perfect Nanny, and Adele, both books in which we're locked into a consciousness. That's the room we're in. And sometimes it's a very airless place. And with this trilogy, all the windows are open. It's a book that is saturated with place. And I want to stay with language and stay with what it means to work for you, Leïla, on this much broader canvas than I think your readers have seen you working with. And Sam, what that meant for you, because it's not even just actually the broadness of the canvas, it's also you're working with multiple languages, right? And you know, evocations and words for place that are, you know, full of local knowledge. So yeah, tell me a little bit about what it meant to move into this register.
Yes, it was very interesting for me to try also to give a certain, not a sense, but sound of Arabic also in the book. You know, in my life, the question of language in my own life was very important. I was born and raised in Morocco, but I was speaking French with my parents. I was speaking Arabic with the nanny. There was a question also of social class associated with Arabic, the Darija, which is not the classical Arabic, but the Arabic that we speak in the street in Morocco. You would speak it with people from lower social class, and you would speak with the bourgeois in French. My grandmother, she would speak Arabic, French, but also German, and so German was very familiar to my ear. And I think I was always very, very sad and very surprised that I don't speak classical Arabic, although I've studied it from the age of 6 to the age of 18. And it's inexplicable. I don't understand how it's possible that I was a very serious student, and I don't understand how it's possible that this language never stick with me. It left completely from me. So I think I wanted also to put this in the book. The fact that we live in a country where we hear multiple languages all the time, and where we mix languages in the same sentence. If you go to Morocco, someone can talk to you and in the same sentence use French, Moroccan, Berber, and Spanish. And it's very natural, very familiar to people. And I decided also not to translate the Arabic word in the French text, because I consider that very often you put French word in English text or Arabic text and you don't translate them. It's just en français dans le texte. And I consider for the French public it's for me normal to put some word in Arabic, because Arabic is also now a French language. It's everywhere in France, and people know the khawar, toubib, or words like that. So it was also a political statement for me to say it's not a foreign language for you, so I'm not going to translate it, we're going to keep it this way. And in Spanish, it was very interesting because my translator in Spanish, she decided to use a lot of Spanish word with Arab origin. So you hear in the text Spanish and Arab inside the Spanish, and it was very, very interesting.
What was the question?
The question was what it means. I was curious about both of you moving into this larger canvas, and moving into like a language of place and negotiating the way that Arabic functions in this novel for you, what it meant to bring it into translation. All these different questions.
I mean, I think the main thing I noticed or enjoyed about the transition from Lullaby and Adele to this trilogy was just the sort of, it's like more spacious, everything's roomier, the sentences are longer, they flow more freely. I mean, I really enjoyed both the first two books, but they're very kind of locked in, and there's a tension running all the way through them. These are much more kind of oceanic books. So yeah, it was kind of freeing in that way. There was more freedom to find different solutions in English, I think. I don't really have anything extra to say about the Arabic. I mean, I feel like that's all in the text, and all I did was leave it as it was, really. So,
and that freedom also is echoed in the notion that we're moving into the 1960s, and there's something unfettered and free. We see the characters feeling free, but it's also a notoriously difficult era for writers to take on, even though they seem fatally attracted to it, because it's also so easy to wander into cliché. So as I was reading this, I was also curious about what did you not want to do? What were the risks of this particular book for both of you as translator and writer?
There's a part in the book where I'm describing the hippies coming to Morocco, and my own parents were hippies. And when I was a child, there was a picture of my parents in the living room. My father with very big hair like this, and a beard, and pantalon pattes d'éléphant, and my mother also with her long hair. And they were always telling me about how when we were hippies and blah blah. And then my father his nickname was Karl Marx. So. And when I was a child, my father was a banker and he owned a Mercedes. So I was like, a hippie, I don't know. So I had a very, weird vision of this hippie generation. I was like, how is it possible to go from hippie to yuppie, to go from people defending openness and anti-capitalism and free love to very conformist bourgeois, and to my father telling me, don't put this skirt to go to school, go change yourself. So I was like, did you forget about the time you were a hippie? And so I think I was not idealizing the hippies. And I remember that one day I met a Moroccan man, an old man who lived with them in Essaouira when they arrived. Most of the hippies came from Scandinavia, Denmark, Sweden, but also from the United States. The majority of them were men fleeing from the conscription to Vietnam, so they went to France, Spain, and then to Morocco. And this old Moroccan man, he told me, you know, I don't understand. First, the white people came and they colonized us, and they said that we were savage and that they were going to build roads and hospitals and give us modernity, but they didn't do that. And then other white people arrived and they said, wow, you don't have roads, you don't have hospital, that's so great, we want to live like you. And he said, I don't understand white people, but what do they want? And in a way, when he said that, I understood that hippie, they shared something with the colonizers. They had a very exotic vision of what we used to call the third world. They would come there and they were fascinated by the music and the clothes, and then they would buy the clothes and sell them on Park Avenue or in Ibiza or whatever. So I wanted to show that. I wanted to show that, yeah, they were touching in a way, and they touched me. I think it's, yeah, it's beautiful to see those people who had so much ideals and all this, but it's also something in a way that offend me as a Moroccan woman to understand also why they came and what they wanted. They came, they took what they had to take, and they left.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the way it was not glamorized at all, the cultural, the counterculture in that novel. It's like it's dark almost from the beginning, and you're inside it with all the drug casualties, and I learned a lot. I didn't know a lot about about that part of Morocco's history, and I think generally I learned a lot reading those books and researching them just to
I learned a lot too, and I was thinking that, you know, it's palpable the amount of research you had to do, you know, and you know, you were a journalist. This is something you know how to do, but at a certain point, I think this goes back to my first question, it has to be your story. So when does that stop for you? When does that feeling of confidence of this is how I have to see it, remember it, begin?
It's difficult to say, but in general, a scene depends only on one small detail. If I have one detail, someone telling me an anecdote, I remember that I watched, like it was a documentary about the hippies, and there was this Danish woman, and she was wearing a skirt, and you could see her belly. And she said, when I arrived in Morocco, all the children wanted to touch me and to touch my skin. And just this detail, I can write 10 pages just about that. I think what is difficult is that you read a lot of historical book, and they tell you a lot about political situation and the parties and all this, but you don't really need that in the writing. You need it to understand the situation, but you don't need it in the writing. But then in the book you have a very small detail, and for me it's all about little details, because details, they say everything. So you have to learn a lot and forget a lot. I didn't want this book to be heavy. My idea also is to write about the fact that we never understand our present. You know, I don't judge my parents for not understanding what they were doing, and I don't judge my grandparents for not understanding certain things during colonization. And I try not to judge myself, because I probably don't understand a lot of things that are happening around me. I want to be on the same level as my character. I don't want to be Leïla Slimani from 2023 writing about Morocco a long time ago. I want to try to understand why, when I asked my parents about the 70s, they just answered, it was nice and we danced a lot. And I was like, yeah, but you know that people were killed and people were going to prison and people disappeared. Now that I'm reading a lot of books, it was very dark. And they said, yeah, but we were young. And when you are young and in love, what you want to do is to party and to dance. probably they were a little bit indifferent or blind to the situation. But I think that's the goal also of a writer, to write about this blindness that is also beautiful, because that's thanks to this blindness that we can live and be happy even when there are wars around us and climate change and all this. We still dance, we still read poems, and we still do all these kind of things. And I want to write about that and stop being in the position that I don't like in some historical novel of judging my character. A novel is not a trial, and that's not the point. Try to understand what it was to be at the present of the 60s, not to judge what I think of the 60s right now.
I've always thought that we all want somebody to look at us the way that Leïla looks at her characters. But, I think this is the sort of thing one hates to say to like writers' faces when you sort of like break their work down into a couple of themes, and it just feels so violent. But like one of the things I do think that you return to all the time in your books is this question of freedom and how people, specifically women, balance attachment and autonomy, dependence and danger and risk and all of that. But specifically, I've always thought that freedom may not, and a desire for freedom may not always look like what you think it's going to look like. And I'm so curious about, for both of you, the kind of space that writing affords for you. Is it a place of freedom? Is it a place of interesting constraint?
I used to think that. Writing was my place of freedom. I don't really believe in the naive vision that we can have of freedom. I love the sentence of Janis Joplin, freedom is just another word for nothing else to lose. And I have things to lose. I own things, I have children, I have a position. So the more you have and maybe the less you are free. That's also something very interesting about what we say about powerful women or things like that. I think you're not freer by owning things. That's the contrary. So yes, I used to think that when I was closing the door of my office and writing, I could write whatever I want and I was free. But I understood one thing those past years is that what Virginia Woolf is saying about the room of one's own, it's very interesting because it's true that as a woman and as a writer, you conquer a certain freedom by having a place of your own. But I discovered in her diary that she wanted to write another book called The Open Door, because she thought that maybe it was not enough just this room of your own. What is important also is the place that you have outside and the fact that you can go outside and belong. So now I feel that my office is also a jail. I feel very much imprisoned because I work all the time, and writing is also a way to escape. It's also a way to escape from life. My mother came 2 weeks ago to my home in Portugal, and my husband was not here, and my mother asked me how the dishwasher was working, and I said, I don't know. And then she asked me about something else, for my daughter was having a ballet spectacle, I don't know, and she said, what is she wearing? And I said, I don't know. And I understood that outside of my office there are a lot of things that I don't know, because, writing is like being invisible. People ask you something and you say, I'm writing, I don't care, I don't want to get involved. But at the same time, you're in jail, you're a prisoner in your office. So now I'm not sure that I'm as free as I used to claim I was. No, I'm not. I feel also very much imprisoned in my work.
I feel almost exactly the opposite to that. I mean, I used to write full-time for about 10 years when I was living in France, and I suppose then it was a bit more like that. It was what I did all day. But having spent so much time in the last 10 years translating and having to fit in writing whenever I could, to me it's like going on vacation or something. I love the freedom of writing, and it's not that I dislike translation at all. I enjoy it too, but it's much more. I mean, it's much less risky. It's much simpler and safer. because everything is there in front of you already. There are no wrong turns to be made. But yeah, the exhilaration that comes with the risk in writing is something I really enjoy still.
But also it has to do with the fact that, I don't know if you feel like that, but I am my own boss and I hate my boss. You know, I wake up with my boss and I sleep with my boss and I eat with my boss. I even take my shower with my boss. And that's exhausting because it's always here, why are you not working? Why are you not doing this? Why are you not reading? So, yeah, I just want to get rid of my boss.
I've got a much more understanding boss than you, Ellen.
There's a lot of laughter, but you enable this. One of the interesting things is always to see responses that feel culturally specific to work in translation, and things that different audiences are going to get and not get, and particular tastes. Are there things that have surprised both of you? I mean, not are there. Tell me some of the things that have surprised both of you. As Leïla, as you've seen your books come out in different languages, and Sam, for you, what it means to sort of be translating. Have there things in the reception of books that have been interesting or intriguing to you?
For instance, I was surprised by the reception of Adele in the United States, by how hard and judgmental people were to my character. They hated her and they judged her a lot, saying that she was not a good mother.
She scared them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's something that didn't happen at all in France. So yeah, I was very, very surprised by that. And with the trilogy, what is very interesting, for instance, the trilogy has a huge success in Spain, and I was very surprised by that. But you know, Spain and Morocco are very close geographically and historically, and I think it was the occasion for people in Spain to discover a lot of things about the history of their neighbor, their mysterious neighbor. And for me it was very moving also to see that people now maybe have the desire to understand a country like Morocco. When I was a child, you know, or even when I began as a writer, I remember that a French journalist, she told me, "You're too much gifted to write about Arabs." And I was like, I don't know if I really like what you say. So because of The Perfect Nanny, and she said you should continue to write about French people. You're too gifted to write about Arabs. And so I felt also that in France, people were disappointed that I was going back to my country. But why? You knew to write about us, continue to write about us. And but I think it's something that we all have, all African writers and African artists, we have to fight against this inhibition that we all have inside us, this idea that we are not interesting, or we are not interesting enough, that we are not universal, people will not buy that. You think about this, of course, you can't help but thinking about this, but I think we need to fight against this, and I'm very privileged and very happy to have publishers who believe also in that, and believe that maybe step by step we will try and convince the public that yes, of course, it's interesting. And that's why I wanted to write something that was long and that had some profoundness, some scope, because I believe that the story of Morocco has as much panache and as much interest as the story of Italy or France or Great Britain. And I really, really believe in that. I think it's important to fight against this inhibition.
This isn't really answering your question. This isn't really answering your question, but the main thing that surprises me about reading all the press surrounding Leïla's books is how incredibly entertaining and fluid all her interviews are. And she never says the same thing twice. I mean, do you enjoy that? Do you enjoy being interviewed?
I don't know. My boss enjoys it very much. he's looking at me. I'll tell you when he's not here.
I think I just have time for like a few last questions with the two of you before we're going to open it up and see if the audience has questions. I suppose I wonder if you can tease a little bit about the next book in the trilogy, Leïla. Can you tell us a bit where we're going to go?
Yes, so the first one was more or less about colonization. The second one is what we call in French neo-colonialism, so post-colonialism. And the third one will be globalization, because it begins in the 80s. So I was born in 81, so it's more or less my generation. And it's this moment where a lot of people from Morocco went abroad, became immigrants. And now in Morocco, in every Moroccan family, you have someone living in the United States or in France, in Belgium, in Canada. So it's something that deeply and profoundly changed the identity of the Moroccan society. So it's going to be about that, about immigration, and also about the rise of Islamism and conservatism. It was a very hard time for us because, you know, I was raised with the idea, the utopia, that you could be from both sides. My parents raised me saying, you know, you're a tree with your roots in Africa and your lives in Europe, and you can be a bridge between two cultures. And on September 11, this utopia disappeared. There was this idea of the shock of civilization. You had different blocks, and those blocks could not have any kind of dialogue between them. And I want to write about, the death of this utopia and, the sadness it provoked for me and for my generation. And, you know, a few months ago, there was a big soccer game between France and Morocco during the World Cup, and one of my friends, he called me and he said, "Oh, I'm so happy. That's the first time in 20 years that we have a good news concerning Muslim." And I was like, wow. I was not, yeah. And I want to write about that, 20 years of bad news. Yeah, it could be a title, 20 years of bad news. Yeah.
I mean, the other one I have written down in my notes that you said earlier is "White people, what do they want?" which I also think might be, there might be something there. I'm going to end by asking, I mean, I'm so struck by this is the first time the two of you have met face to face, and I would like to end by having each of you ask the other a question.
Oh, yes.
Thanks for warning us beforehand.
Yes, I have a question, because my translator, they don't work all with the same method. Some of them, they read all the book first and then they translate, and others, they begin to translate page by page without knowing what is going to happen next. And you never told me how you do, and I would like to know how you work.
I've done it both ways with your books, because at least, I think 3 of them I was asked to read beforehand to write a report for the publishers. So Adele, In the Country of Others, and Watch Us Dance, I read beforehand. The Scent of Flowers at Night and The Perfect Nanny I did not read beforehand. I don't think it makes a big difference to the actual translation either way. I think if you read it beforehand, you can probably pick out possible mistakes that you're going to make during the translation process, but you're going to fix them at the end no matter what anyway. So I enjoy reading your books, so it's not, I'm happy to read them beforehand, but I generally don't read every book I translate before I translate it. I read it as I translate it. I translate as I read it.
And your question?
I don't know. I guess I'm slightly in awe of you. I mean, you're doing all this in a foreign language. You do it all over the world. You do it day after day. You never sound boring. You never repeat yourself in any of these interviews. Do you devote as much time to thinking about what to say in interviews as you do to writing your books?
Oh, that's a good question. No, I think, I think I'm still this little girl who makes the difference between inside and outside. Outside there is a certain me, and inside another me. And I really, my poor children and my poor family, they know another Leïla who is very silent and not as entertaining as I am tonight. Everything for my public.
Thank you. Shall we turn it over to
So if you have question, I have a mic. Just say, I have a question. You want a question?
There's one here.
Est-ce que je peux poser la question en français? Bon. Je voulais savoir, peut-être que vous l'avez dit, puis que ça m'a échappé parce que mon anglais est moyen. Je voulais savoir comment on choisit un traducteur ou une traductrice et savoir si c'est le traducteur ou la traductrice qui a choisi Leïla ou c'est Leïla qui a choisi. Alors, je me demandais, dans votre cas, comment ça s'est passé. Alors.
Such a good question.
Je vous réponds en français?
Should I translate the question?
No, actually, I didn't choose my translator at the beginning. I didn't. My publisher, they read the book and then they find the good translator for the writer or for the book. I suppose that there are some writers who choose their translator. Maybe it exists, but it's not my case. They were all imposed to me, but I like them anyway.
I think almost exclusively it's the publishers who choose the translators, not writers.
I've really enjoyed both the books in your trilogy, and one thing that really jumped out to me is that there seems to be not a lot of dialogue. And I feel, and maybe it's just I haven't read enough, but I feel that that's kind of a trend in contemporary French literary fiction that isn't present in American literary fiction. So I'm wondering if you could talk about how you choose when you use dialogue or when you describe events or scenes.
I'm going to be very sincere with you. I suck at dialogues. I can't write a dialogue. That's why I don't write dialogues. Because each time I write a dialogue, my publisher is like, your dialogue is not good. This page is good, but I don't like the dialogue, so I suppress the dialogue. So that's why my characters are very silent. I could do you a very intelligent and subtle answer, but the truth is that I'm not very good at dialogue, so I prefer to suppress them. And now, actually, it became also a sort of mark of my writing, because now I put what they say inside the chapter, and you have a mix between what they think and what they say. So yeah, it's interesting also sometimes to try to use your own flows and your own inabilities to try to transform it. But the truth is, the beginning of that is that I really suck at dialogues. It's very difficult to write a good dialogue.
Thank you. Hi. I wanted to ask a question to the relationship of the two of you. One of the things I find so fascinating about literary translation is it deals with the possibilities and the restrictions of the first language and the second language, and it's also an act of deep reading and unpacking of the meaning of each word. And sometimes there isn't a word in English, say, that perfectly maps onto the French word. And in the back and forth between you, as you try to decide what's the best phrase, is it vagina, is it vulva, is it, many other things, did you find that you learned new things about the text? And were there, in that process of thinking it through and making the decision that was necessary for English, were there any elements that were surprising?
Of course, and the translation is also a very precise work, very profound. So sometimes Sam writes to me and he said, there is something that is not logical because you said this in these pages, and my French publisher, he didn't see it. But the work of Sam is so precise that of course he can see sometimes some incoherence or things like that, and it's very interesting for me because I'm like, oh, how could we have not seen that? And sometimes also we have discussion, but also with John, with my publisher, about some words that don't have the same, not only the same signification, but the same le même poids ou la même incidence in French and in English. Some words are very marked in English. You can't use it. I think about a word we were speaking about a few weeks ago, and we had a discussion about that. Can we translate the French word into English, knowing how complicated this word is? So yes, you have a lot of sometimes very, very deep and political or sociological question that comes just with one word. It's very interesting.
And with regard to that particular word, the US and UK editions are different in that regard, because the UK publisher did not say anything about it. They just left it as it was. With the US, who is sitting right there, yeah, it was basically considered to be not possible, and so we had to change the whole sentence. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy those conversations, and they're fascinating. I don't remember a huge amount of details about what we've talked about, or what we've discussed, really. But I've reread them occasionally when I've had to do an interview before, and it's almost like a little book in itself. You could publish the dialogue. So.
Bonsoir. My question is about how you conceive the trilogy. If it's something that you had thought about particular themes you wanted to implement for each one, or if it's something that comes more in the process of writing it. Just because these two books feel a little different, just in the way that the story is told, even though they have similar narratives that are interweaved within the two. So I'm curious what the writing process is, if it differs from one to the next. And secondly, how this process of writing and the reception of the book has changed your perspective on your relationship to your family or your identity, your heritage, or understanding of culture and history and all of that.
In terms of writing process, I'm not very organized. I would love to tell you that I have a structure and characters and a plan and that I know exactly where I'm going, and that's absolutely not that. But I think that my pleasure as a writer comes from the fact that I write in the dark. I don't really know where I go. The other day I was with my daughter, she's 6, and every night I go in her bed and I tell her a story, and then I switch off the light, and every night she says, I'm afraid of the dark. So I stay with her and I say, okay, we're going to switch off the light, we're going to be in the dark, but keep your eyes open. And after a few seconds you will begin to see the forms of the furniture in your room. So you will be in the dark, but it doesn't mean you're blind. You will see certain things. That's exactly how I feel when I write. I'm in the dark and I keep my eyes open, and seconds after seconds I can see some things appear, but I like it to be in the dark. I don't want to organize everything, because my characters, they tell me things. For the second part, it was funny, because one day someone asked me about the relationship that Selim has with the incestuous relationship that he has, and the reader was very, very outraged and shocked, and he said, why did you decide to do that? And I said, I didn't decide. Selim entered the apartment and I felt that he wanted to make love with her. What can you do? That was not my plan. At the beginning, he was just supposed to come and give her money. And when I say that, I look crazy, but that's absolutely true. At one point, your characters, they have their own life. They want to do certain things. But if you want this to happen, if you want this magic to happen, you have to accept to stay a little bit in the dark. I don't want to play puppets. They are not puppets for me. There are people living inside me. There are ghosts. And sometimes they appear, and I just have to seize them for the little time. They will appear and they disappear again. And for the reception, for my family, I'm very lucky, because most of them are dead, so I can write whatever I want about them. And now there's just my mother, and my mother, she's silent, so that's cool. I'm not sure she's very happy, because at the supermarket all the time people come and tell her, I didn't know that your parents had such a sexual life, wow. And you know, my mother, she's very shy, so for her it's not easy. And now we're doing the movie, so I think seeing her own parents having sex is going probably to kill her. But you know, the reception was okay from my family. They still talk to me. I mean, the one who are alive, they still talk to me. And actually, the one who are not alive still talk to me too, which is very weird.
Hi. I have a question about titles. And in particular, your book, Une chanson douce, was translated by The Perfect Nanny. And I'm fascinated by the fact that when you give a title in English, you divulge something. When you do The Perfect Nanny, you know that it's going to be about a nanny. When you wrote it as Une chanson douce, you really don't know what it's going to be about. And I remember reading Au revoir là-haut, which was, by Pierre Lemaitre, which was translated by the Swindle, Great Swindle. And I always wondered, why was it translated by something so that you know it's going to be a swindle, some kind of concoction that, is different from Au revoir là-haut, which your imagination can tell about. So how do you react to that kind of, how do you react to the translation, and how do you choose the title, is my question.
Okay, I can answer the title translation question very easily. It's actually translated as Lullaby in the UK and The Perfect Nanny in the US, and those decisions were both by the publishers, not by me or by Leïla. And John Siciliano is sitting right here, so maybe he can answer why he chose The Perfect Nanny.
It's fascinating to me how controversial this little decision I made has become. It's right there in the text. The perfect nanny is a phrase that comes up again and again. It just stood out to me that this is the title, and a title is marketing. And as a publisher, marketing is a big part of my job. The movie is going to be called The Perfect Nanny. The book's called The Perfect Nanny. There's no slippage there. It's the perfect title.
No, but I think it's interesting what you said about marketing. I think that probably American publishers, they assume the idea that publishing is also about marketing. In France, there is something a little bit probably snobbish about the fact that no, publishing is about art, publishing is about moving people and blah, 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 and there is no marketing in it. Of course there is marketing, but there is this idea that the more mysterious it is and the more people will want to open the book and discover what's in it. That's like putting a gift in a box that prevents you from knowing what it's inside. So it's a different kind of marketing, but it's marketing anyway.
Thank you. Great conversation. Enjoyed it very much. And cheers to your latest novel. So this question is for Leïla. You mentioned that every time you had a question and you asked your father, he gave you books, which is awesome. I think it's a great way to introduce kids into reading. So I'm just curious to know, did you find any answers to your questions through Jack London and Dostoevsky?
Yes, sometimes I found answers. You know, when I left from Morocco, I was 17. That's something I'm going to write about, but I tell you anyway, you have a little spoiler. My father, he didn't know what to give me just before I left from Morocco to go live in France. And he came to my room and he said to me, you know, you're going to go and I think you should not come back. Never come back. Which is something very hard to say to a young girl of 17. He said, you will never have a place here. It's not a place for you. You have to go and find another another country to live, and you have to do what you have to do and be free and all that. And he said, I thought for a long time, what am I going to give you as a gift before you go? And he gave me l'Odyssée d'Homère. And he said, read this book for your whole life, read this book, and never go back to Ithaque. Never go back, because you're not Ulysse. You have to stay on the sea, and you will meet sirens and cyclops and monsters, but never go back. So I found a lot of answers in this book that I read very, very often, thinking of my father. And I never gave a book to my father. I gave a book to him when he died. I put a book in his grave, but you will know this by buying the third part of my novel.
Bonsoir, Leïla. Thank you for being here. Love your work. I'm a fellow Moroccan, by the way. So I'm curious about your process also, and specifically, do you feel like you needed to write Dans le Jardin de l'Ogre or Chanson douce before your public could receive and be willing to listen to Le Pays des Autres and Regardez-nous danser? Do you feel like you had to tell those stories? And you talked about it earlier, characters in France and whatnot, before you could approach that Moroccan side of the land. Yeah, if you can tell us a little bit about that. Thank you.
You know, I don't know if it was a conscious strategy. I'm not sure I decided to do that before I was going to write The Country of Others, because I had no idea that I was going to write The Country of Others after. But I was probably in the time of my life when I wrote Dans le Jardin de l'Ogre, where I had a lot of anger in me, a lot of anger because of the situation of my father, anger of being a woman, an immigrant in France, where sometimes people wouldn't take me seriously. And there was this story, the story of Adele is very, very dark and very violent. And I think that it's not that I needed to write this before The Country of Others, but I needed to get rid of this violence and this desire for revenge that I had inside me. And I wanted, you know, Adele, she suffers a lot, and she takes a lot of violence on physically, and that's probably something like it was something like a catharsis for me. And people ask me all the time why I didn't write about being a Moroccan at the beginning and all that. But for me, the first identity that was very, very important for me before being an Arab or that, it was being a woman. Being a woman for me, it obsessed me for so many years. You know, since I was very small, I heard all the time, no, you can't because you're a girl. No, it's not possible because you're a girl. And my father had 3 girls, and we were living with 3 girls, the nanny, my mother, my grandmother, and my aunt. And my father was going to kill himself every day. And every day people would come to the house and say, oh, poor you, you only have girls. And it was always only girls. And I was so outraged about that, I think that the first things I wanted to write about was being a woman, no matter where you come from or whatever. I wanted to write about being a mother and being a woman.
So we have time for one last question. Yeah. Oh, okay, you're ready.
Yes, thank you. Bonsoir.
Where are you?
Hi. This is actually a question for Sam. I know that you are the best at what you do and incredibly precise, but I am curious if there is a place for the conversation of race and also gender when it comes to translation. And I have that question because when I read Leïla in French, I'm going to embarrass my husband because he's sitting next to me, but he's Moroccan, so I'll ask him, for example, for Adele or Jardin de l'Ogre, questions for translation, he'll translate it, and I would think, I wonder if a woman would translate that differently. However, for the trilogy, when I would ask him for certain parts, it would resonate with him so deeply because so much of the story is similar to his background and things he knows. So I'm just wondering if this ever plays a role in how you approach a text or how you work with Leïla.
I don't know how to answer that, really. I mean, obviously, I am white and I'm a man, But when I'm translating, I don't feel like either of those things. I mean, I'm responding to the text, and I don't know if I would translate it differently if I was Moroccan or female. I have no idea, but I do know that there are things that Leïla and I have in common which are not to do with gender or ethnicity. And when I translate things related to being a parent, for instance, or to reading Kundera when I was a teenager, falling in love, whatever, there's an extra tension or frisson that I feel when I translate those things, but I don't honestly believe that I would translate them any differently if I didn't feel that. Yeah, it's not like I translated The Perfect Nanny like desperately waiting for the white husband to turn up so I could translate something that I knew, you know? It's like the text as a whole works in itself, and I think, as I'm a writer as well, and I think a lot of the magic of fiction, the magic of storytelling is being able to inhabit other minds. So, I mean, I don't know, if Leïla would rather have a female Moroccan translator, I have no idea, but I don't think it would make a difference.
Is that all the time we have?
Yeah.
Thank you. Really just exciting, interesting, spicy questions. Thank you all so much for being here. Congratulations on this book.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.